Welcome to Console Crapshoot, where we spin a wheel to play a random video game on original hardware. Carl finally gave us the Neo Geo last week. That doesn't mean we're going to stop hoping for it again, but we're moving on. What's next? We haven't played the 3DO yet, but this week it's going to be the TurboGrafx-16. Not bad, been a while since we've had that. Only 95 games on that wheel. A lot more games in Japan, way more popular there. Okay, the legendary Axe. Not bad. I've heard this game being mentioned before, but I don't know much about it. I looked it up and it was a launch game for the TurboGrafx-16 here in the US. And spoiler alert, it's considered really good for its time. It's on the very top of a lot of lists for this system. Despite the 16 in the TurboGrafx-16's name, it wasn't quite 16-bit. It kind of was on a technicality, but you compare this system to the specs of the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and it does not hold a candle. But it's a lot more powerful than the NES, and as you can see here, the system was really good at pushing colors. This especially is a super colorful game. The graphics and animation here are really on point for the time. And this is interesting. I'm really glad we got this game this particular week because it illustrates an interesting point. If you remember, last week's game was Magician Lord on the Neo Geo, basically the same kind of game. Side-scrolling, hack-and-slash adventure game. And on the surface, obviously Magician Lord looked and played and sounded a lot better, but there wasn't too much there in the way of nuanced game design. It wasn't super engaging, it was just pump quarters into it. This game is designed to be the right balance of challenge and engaging game design. The balance here, the execution of the game design is pretty top-notch. The patterns of the enemies in the game are just hard enough, but it's just right where you can learn them, and after a couple tries, after a couple mistakes, you can get through them. It really reminds me of one of my favorite games of all time, and that's Rastan. They made a Sega Master System version of it, but I was addicted to this game when I was a little kid in the arcade. Very similar kind of game here. Nowhere near the soundtrack of Rastan. That game's music was just straight bangers, wall to wall, but very similar vibe. I'm surprised that this wasn't the pack-in game at launch for the TurboGrafx-16. If you remember, the big mascot eventually for TurboGrafx-16 was Bonk's Adventure, but he wasn't there in the beginning, much like Sonic the Hedgehog wasn't around when the Genesis came out. It was packed in with Altered Beast. The TurboGrafx-16's pack-in game was Keith Courage and Alpha Zones, and that game was fine. It was just kind of duty. This game's way more fun compared to Keith Courage. This is a pretty solid game. This should have been the pack-in game. I'm having a lot of fun with this one. It's a little frustrating, but what good game from this era wasn't a little bit frustrating? You have a decent amount of life, you can take some hits, and as you go, you unlock more power from your axe. So if you keep swinging your axe, you can see this meter on the top sort of depletes. If you stop swinging it, it fills up all the way, and then when you swing, it has a lot more power. And as the game progresses, you unlock a bigger and bigger meter. That's pretty cool. A legendary axe indeed. You fight giant spiders, you fight a couple of grizzly bears, these weird cavemen looking guys. The bats and hawks are super annoying, but again, once you get used to them, you get the patterns and you're good to go. And you got some frogmen. That settles it. Frogmen. It's great. I was just thinking this game would be better if there was some frogmen, and then some frogmen jumped out. 0 notes at this point now. My only complaint here is that it's such a basic game that I don't have much to say. There's very little to talk about. I do wish that there was some story in the beginning, that there was maybe some cutscenes or some text to read as to what we're doing. There is an actual story to the game, but you don't know it unless you read the instruction booklet. But it's pretty basic. The village elders give you their legendary axe to go save your childhood friend from a cult. Sounds good. That wouldn't have taken too long to set up in the game, but okay, I'll read the booklet. So other than that, not much else to say. What do we think? What are we gonna rate the legendary axe for the TurboGrafx-16? Yeah, the only word that comes to mind is solid. This is a great example of good game design. Like I said, last week's game surpasses this in so many ways, and I gave that a 3 out of 5. This one, that's technologically way worse, but it's more engaging. It's more fun. It's a video game and not just a quarter eater. I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 5. Pleasantly surprised, and it made me want to go play Rastan, which again is my jam. Alright, super fun one. If you have a TurboGrafx-16 or a PC Engine, I really recommend you trying that one. And it did have a sequel that is also regarded as pretty good, Legendary Axe 2, and you don't get an axe in that game, strangely enough, but I think I'm gonna play that now, off camera. But thank you once again for watching, guys, and we'll see what we get on the wheel next week. See you then.